The maid's daughter noticed the symptoms the doctors missed and saved the millionaire's dying son. In a white stone mansion perched on a seaside hill, the afternoon sun slid through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting light over oil paintings and priceless sculptures. Amid all the beauty, Edward Langford, a renowned art collector, was losing the one thing no fortune could save: his only son, Oliver. Oliver was 11. For 6 long months he had been fading, his body growing thinner, his gaze emptier each day. Dozens of doctors had come and gone, bringing machines, tests, promises, and confidence. Yet every one of them left defeated, and the house filled with the quiet rhythm of weak heartbeats and an unspoken despair. Edward had always believed every problem had a solution. In his world, knowledge could fix anything, or money could. But this illness, the thing slowly stealing his child, seemed to belong to another realm entirely, one where human logic no longer ruled. Downstairs, Clara Ruiz, the loyal housekeeper, kept the mansion running as if nothing were falling apart. At her side was her 12-year-old daughter, Maya, who often came after school to help her mother. Maya knew she was supposed to be invisible, to move softly, to stay silent. But as she passed the grand atrium, she stopped. From the shadowed hallway, through a wall of glass, she could see Oliver lying among IV lines and monitors. Maya didn't understand medicine. She didn't know what the numbers meant, but she knew how to look. Since childhood, she had heard stories about her great-grandmother, Alma Ruiz, a field medic during the Korean War who had left behind a small leather notebook filled with notes and a single message. The war may be loud, but truth is always quiet. All you must do is watch. In that house filled with the hum of machines and the measured beeps of life, Maya watched. She listened. She did not yet know that her quiet eyes were about to see what the smartest minds had missed, and that her silence, gentle, persistent, and brave, would change everything. The Langford mansion stood alone among the seaside pines. When the wind swept through, the whisper of leaves mixed with the steady rhythm of waves. Yet inside that house, there was only a silence so thick it felt alive. Cold white walls, marble floors that shone like mirrors, glass panels reflecting everything except human warmth. Sometimes Maya thought this place looked more like a museum than a home, a place built to preserve beauty and to bury pain. Every morning, Clara rose before dawn. She moved softly in her worn shoes, adjusted the curtains, brewed coffee for Mr. Langford, and dusted frames worth more than an entire neighborhood. She did everything with near-perfect precision. No noise, no mistakes, no trace. "Don't let anyone see you," she often said. "We are here to work, not to exist." So Maya nodded, but there was always a flicker of light in her eyes, a curiosity no rule could extinguish. That afternoon, while Clara cleaned the dining room, Maya sat on the marble staircase and opened the small, worn notebook of her great-grandmother, Alma Ruiz. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded to soft blue. She had read it 100 times, yet it never lost its voice. "Never trust the machine completely," Alma had written. "The human body speaks in its own language, but only those who listen can understand." Maya smiled faintly. Alma had tended soldiers in the war where there were no scans or lab tests, only eyes and instinct. Maybe that was why Maya believed in the quiet power of observation. The sharp click of heels pulled her back. From the corridor, Nurse Green appeared, rigid in her white uniform, eyes fixed on the tablet in her hand, as if every truth lived inside those numbers. At the far end of the hallway, Dr. Bennett spoke in a low voice to Mr. Langford. His tone was calm, professional, but underneath it lay exhaustion. Maya caught fragments of words: inflammation, idiopathic, unexplained. They sounded cold, mechanical, the language of distance. In the main room, Oliver lay motionless beneath the soft light, his skin pale as porcelain. He rarely spoke now, only twitched a finger or blinked before sinking back into sleep. From behind the glass wall, Maya watched him longer than she should have. Her mother said staring was rude, but Maya wasn't being rude, she was searching because something felt wrong. In that silent house, everyone trusted machines, data, and the logic of men. But Maya trusted something older, the voice of Alma that whispered through time. Truth doesn't live in the noise of clever men. It breathes in the quiet of those about to fall. And from that moment, Maya began to truly watch. Morning unfolded beneath a gray sky veiled in mist. The sea below the hill lay still, like a sheet of tarnished silver. Inside the main hall of the Langford estate, pale light filtered through thin curtains, falling across a pair of small, motionless hands resting on white linen. Oliver Langford had not woken. He lay surrounded by IV lines and flickering monitors, the steady beeping filling the room, the mechanical rhythm of a life being held together by science. Around him stood 4 men in dark suits, the brightest minds money could buy. They spoke in measured tones, their voices a mix of confidence and fatigue. "No sign of inflammation," one murmured. "Liver and kidney functions are normal," another replied. Dr. Bennett, the oldest, pushed his glasses higher on his nose and stared at the thick file in front of him. "No autoimmune markers, no infection, no genetic anomaly," he said quietly. "A child is wasting away, and none of our science can tell us why." From the wide window overlooking the ocean, Edward Langford stood in silence, tall, still, unblinking. 6 months ago, he had been a man who believed that every question had an answer, every problem a price. Now he believed only one thing: these men, however brilliant, had missed something vital. "You can call it whatever you like," his voice rumbled without turning, "but I know what I see. My son is dying. You just refuse to see it." Nurse Green stepped forward, her face expressionless as she checked the monitor. "All vitals are stable, sir," she said flatly. "Every protocol is being followed." Edward turned his head, his voice low but sharp. "Every protocol," he said, "but not a single human instinct." No one replied. The silence thickened until it felt like fog pressing against the skin. At the corner of the room, Clara Ruiz bent to polish the glass table, while Maya sat quietly beside her, pretending to take notes in her mother's ledger. She saw what no one else did: Oliver's fingers twitching, then falling still again. The tiniest movement, invisible to the eyes, too busy searching for data. Maya tilted her head, sensing something off. A thin thread inside her chest tightened, the same feeling she'd had when reading her great-grandmother Alma's words. "Don't trust the noise. Look into the quiet." Dr. Bennett finally set his pen down. "We'll send samples to Switzerland," he said. "It might be a rare metabolic disorder. We'll try a new therapy." Edward let out a dry, broken laugh. 6 months, 12 specialists, hundreds of tests, and now another continent to find nothing. No one answered. The door closed softly behind him, and the sound of waves filled the hollow room. Maya sat still, eyes fixed on Oliver. She didn't understand science or medicine, but she could feel it, the kind of fear that doesn't scream, only stretches into endless silence. The door had barely closed behind Edward Langford's heavy footsteps when the mansion sank again into that unbearable quiet. Dr. Bennett and his team kept talking, but their voices blurred into the background hum of machines. In the corner, Maya stood motionless, her small hands gripping her mother's notebook, her gaze fixed on the boy on the bed. Outside, the sea murmured against the rocks, endless and indifferent. Inside, only the beeping of the monitors broke the silence. Maya didn't know why she couldn't leave. There was something about the way the boy breathed, the faint tremor of his fingers, that made her chest tighten, as if her body already knew something was about to happen. Oliver stirred. A faint twitch rippled through his left hand, almost invisible. Maya took a step forward, her heartbeat quickening. The index finger curled, then tapped 3 times against the thumb. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Again. The rhythm repeated, steady, haunting. She glanced around. No one noticed. Nurse Green was studying her tablet. Dr. Bennett was writing notes. Maya's breath caught. Then she saw it. Oliver's head gave a small, sharp jerk to the right. Not a spasm, not random, but deliberate, and with it came a smell. Faint at first, then stronger, a strange, sweet, burnt scent, like sugar caramelizing on hot metal. She frowned. She knew that smell. She'd smelled it once when her mother forgot a pot of syrup on the stove. But here, now, it came from nowhere, or maybe from the boy himself. The closer she stepped, the stronger it became. Sweet, yet sad, as if warning of something unseen. And then in her mind, her great-grandmother's words rose like a whisper carried by the wind. The war may be loud, but truth is always quiet. Alma was right. Here, among proud men and cold machines, truth was whispering again. And no one was listening. Maya turned toward her mother, who was dusting the table with careful, practiced hands. "Mom," she whispered. Clara looked up sharply. "Don't," she said in a low voice. "Not a word." "But, Mom, I think—" "No, Maya. You'll get us fired. This isn't our world." Maya bit her lip hard. Her eyes flicked back to the boy. His hand still tapped. His head jerked again. The burnt sugar smell grew stronger, heavy in the air. She knew this wasn't normal, and if she stayed silent, she'd never forgive herself. Dr. Bennett's voice cut through the stillness. "I've contacted Geneva. They're willing to take the case." Something inside Maya snapped. She couldn't hold it anymore. "Excuse me," she said softly. "He's doing something. His hand." Every head turned. The room froze. Dr. Bennett arched a brow. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "His hand," Maya said, her voice trembling. "His left hand. It's tapping 3 times. Then his head moves to the right. And there's a smell, like burnt sugar." Nurse Green let out a thin laugh. "Burnt sugar? How imaginative." Dr. Bennett's lips curled faintly. "Fairy tales don't cure illness, young lady." Clara rushed forward, panic in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. She's just imagining things." Maya looked up at her mother, her throat tight with tears. "I'm not imagining it. It's real. It's repeating, like a pattern." No one spoke, only Edward did. He had just returned, standing at the doorway, still as stone. "What smell?" he asked, his voice low. "Burnt sugar, sir," Maya said, her voice small but certain. "From him." Edward crossed the room slowly, knelt beside his son, and leaned down. He inhaled once, sharply. His face changed. Something cracked open inside him. He looked up at Dr. Bennett. "Do you smell it?" Dr. Bennett frowned, hesitated, leaned closer, sniffed the air. "I don't think so." "You're not trying," Edward said, voice cold as the sea outside. "It's right here." Silence fell, heavy and alive. Maya stood frozen, clutching the notebook to her chest. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, every eye was on her. A 12-year-old girl trembling with fear, but brave enough to speak. And in that moment, the silence in the house was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of something beginning to change. The room stayed frozen after Maya spoke. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. No one dared move. The steady beep of the monitor filled the cold white air like a heartbeat that wasn't human. Edward Langford straightened, the composure of a man used to command settling back over him. His gaze swept across the room, the doctors, the nurse, then stopped on the small girl clutching the old notebook to her chest. "No one leaves this room," he said, each word precise, final. "Not until we see what she saw." Dr. Bennett opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Edward's eyes silenced him. "You've spoken for 6 months," Edward continued. "Now it's her turn." The air thickened. Someone swallowed audibly. Maya stood near the wall, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She hadn't meant to become the center of every gaze, but now they were all waiting to see if the maid's daughter was mad or right. Time dragged like a stretched wire. Afternoon light slanted across the room, turning the glass walls into mirrors that reflected every tense, expectant face. Nurse Green stood beside the bed, arms crossed, glancing at her watch. 30 minutes passed. No one spoke. Only the clock ticked, and the sea murmured faintly beyond the walls. Dr. Bennett exhaled sharply, a brittle smile curving his lips. "Mr. Langford, I assure you—" "Quiet," Edward said flatly. "Just wait." And then it happened. Maya saw it first, exactly as before. Oliver's left hand curled slightly, the index finger tapping 3 times against the thumb. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Again, precise, measured. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. Every head turned toward the bed. Dr. Bennett leaned closer. He saw it too. It was real. No reflex, no coincidence. "This can't be," he murmured. "It's not involuntary." Before he could finish, Oliver's head jerked sharply to the right, just as Maya had described. The room went utterly still. Then it came, that faint, haunting scent, sweet and charred, drifting through the air. It grew stronger, undeniable, wrapping around every breath. Edward inhaled deeply. His expression darkened. "Now do you smell it?" His voice cut like glass. Dr. Bennett stood rigid, sweat forming at his temple. "It could be a chemical reaction?" "No," Edward interrupted. "No more guesses. The boy is signaling, and you all ignored him." Maya kept her eyes on Oliver. She knew what came next. She took a breath and whispered, "Now comes the headache." And almost on cue, Oliver groaned. "My head." The sound was faint, but it pierced through the silence like a blade. Dr. Bennett turned to Maya, disbelief and fear mingling in his eyes. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen it before," she said, her voice steady now. Edward approached her slowly, his expression softening into something close to reverence. He turned back to the doctor. "From now on," he said quietly but firmly, "you listen to her." Nurse Green gasped. "Sir, you can't. She's just a—" "Enough." Edward's voice dropped to steel. "That child saw what your pride blinded you to. 6 months, a dozen specialists, machines, and charts, and none of you noticed. Only her." Dr. Bennett's jaw tightened, his face flushed with humiliation, then something else. Respect. He bowed his head slightly. "You're right, sir. From now on, I'll observe as she does." Edward nodded once, then sat beside his son, taking the small, frail hand into his own. His shoulders trembled. "She was right," he whispered. "We just needed to listen." In that moment, the room ceased to be a battlefield of authority and became something fragile, human, not arrogance, but the humility of people finally willing to see what a child had seen. Under Edward's command, no one spoke. The silence that followed wasn't despair anymore, but a taut, waiting hush. Maya was seated on a chair exactly 6 steps from the bed. Edward said, "Sit there, watch. Don't miss a thing." She nodded. Her hands still clutched the worn leather notebook, her fingers tracing its faded edges. She sat straight, eyes fixed on every rise and fall of Oliver's chest. The doctors and nurses hovered nearby, pretending to be calm, but the cracks in their arrogance were showing. Dr. Bennett paced the floor, restless, while Nurse Green stood with her arms crossed, lips curved in a half-sneer. "What are we doing?" she muttered. "Waiting for the child to conjure a miracle?" No one replied. Edward sat still as stone. He no longer trusted the language of men, only silence and the girl's eyes. Time stretched thin. The ticking clock and the whisper of the sea blended into one long pulse of waiting. Maya never blinked. Every tiny motion burned into her awareness, a twitch of fingers, a shallow breath, the flutter of eyelashes. Every detail might be the key. Dr. Bennett glanced at his watch. 3 hours. Nothing. Edward said nothing. "Maybe the girl was lucky the first time," Nurse Green said coldly. "We're sitting here like pilgrims at an altar." Maya heard her, but this time she didn't shrink. Something inside her was steady, quiet, growing stronger. She didn't know medicine, but she knew what she'd seen. Her eyes didn't lie. Then it happened, so faint it might have gone unnoticed. Oliver's left hand twitched. Maya leaned forward, heart racing. "It's starting," she whispered. Dr. Bennett rushed closer. All eyes turned to the boy. The index finger tapped 3 times against the thumb, then stopped, then began again. The air in the room seemed to tighten. "This isn't coincidence," Bennett breathed. Nurse Green's face paled. "It could be mild spasms." "No," Maya said softly. "His head will move next." And as if the world obeyed her, Oliver's head jerked gently to the right. A small moan escaped his lips. The room held its breath. Then came the smell, faint, then thick, sweet and burnt, curling through the air like smoke. Dr. Bennett inhaled slowly. This time he didn't deny it. He turned toward Maya, and in his eyes there was something new. Acceptance. Edward rose, the lamplight glinting in his eyes. "You see," he said quietly. "It's real." No one argued. Nurse Green turned away, her face stiff, but her hands trembled slightly. Maya stayed still, a small statue in the dim light, eyes locked on the boy. In her mind, Alma's words whispered again. "The human body has its own language. Only those who listen can hear it." Maya nodded to herself. She understood now. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was the true observer, the only pair of eyes in that house that truly saw. No one left the room that night. The sound of the sea outside blended with the monitor's steady rhythm, forming a slow, mournful pulse, the heartbeat of a life hanging on. Oliver slept, peaceful after the brief seizure. But Maya remained awake, her eyes fixed on the boy's face, watching every faint twitch of expression. Dr. Bennett stood beside the bed, arms folded, a deep crease between his brows. For the first time in his career, he had no explanation. He had seen it himself. The pattern was real. "It's not like any neurological disorder I've ever known," he muttered. Across from him, Edward Langford's voice was rough from hours of silence. "Then what is it?" Dr. Bennett didn't answer. Maya glanced down at Oliver's hand, then spoke quietly. "I think I know." All eyes turned toward her. She swallowed hard, heart hammering, but her voice was steady. "It's not the illness that makes him weak. It's when he tries, when he pushes himself. That's when it happens." The room went still. Dr. Bennett frowned. "Bennett, what do you mean?" Maya took a breath. The memories flooded back, every tiny moment she had noticed over the days. "He only gets sick after he does something, when he tries to lift his arm, or build something, or even smile. Every time he exerts himself, it's like his body burns from the inside." Dr. Bennett repeated her words slowly, almost to himself. "Tries and weakens, effort and collapse." He closed his eyes, rifling through thousands of cases in his mind. Then suddenly his eyes opened, and there, behind the fatigue, was a spark. If that's true, then it's not neurological. Edward looked up. What then? Metabolic, Bennett said, his tone gaining urgency. The body misfires when energy is spent, a disorder of ion exchange, maybe muscular, not neural. He turned to Maya, and for the first time his eyes held genuine respect. You just opened a completely different path. Maya stayed silent, her hands tightening around her great-grandmother Alma's notebook. In her mind, the old words echoed. Sometimes, to understand someone, you must look not at what keeps them standing, but at what makes them fall. Dr. Bennett turned to Edward. We can test it. Just a light activity. If I'm right, he'll react. Edward nodded slowly. Do it. Near the door, Clara stood clasping her hands together, her heart caught between fear and pride. She watched her daughter, the girl she had taught to be silent, now speaking truths that no adult in the room dared to see. Maya didn't look at her mother. Her gaze stayed on Oliver, clear, calm, and unflinching, carrying the one thing grown men had long forgotten, the courage to believe what she saw, and the strength to speak it aloud. The room was bathed in the pale light of dawn. Outside, the sea murmured softly, casting silver reflections onto the glass walls. Oliver lay still, breathing steadily, his face calmer than it had been the night before. Doctor, Bennett stood beside him, notebook open, eyes sharp and waiting. All right, he said, his voice taut as a wire. Let's try something light. Edward nodded. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, his hand trembling as he placed a glass of water on the side table. Oliver, can you drink a little water, son? The boy's eyelids fluttered open. He managed a faint smile. I'll try. His frail hand reached for the glass. The fingers trembled as he tried to lift it. The water rippled, spilling slightly over the rim. He gritted his teeth, tried again, and failed. The glass slipped, tipping onto the marble floor with a soft clink. It's all right, son, Edward murmured, but Maya was already on her feet. Look at his hand, she gasped. Oliver's left hand curled in on itself. The index finger began to tap. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Again. Dr. Bennett froze. Every doctor in the room held their breath, as if afraid that even a whisper might shatter what was happening. Then Oliver's head jerked to the right. A low moan escaped his lips. The air thickened, and then came the smell, faint but distinct, sweet and burnt, curling through the room like smoke. My God, Dr. Bennett whispered. He turned to Edward, then to Maya. This is it. Draw blood now. Nurse Green moved quickly despite her shaking hands. The needle slid in, filling 3 vials of dark blood. Bennett fed them straight into the portable analyzer on the table. The hum of machinery filled the silence. Someone swallowed audibly. Edward stood by his son, gripping the boy's small hand. Maya sat rigid, her pulse pounding in her ears. A sharp ping broke the air. Bennett rushed to the screen. He scanned the numbers, then froze. Potassium, 8.1, he breathed. 8.1, my God, that's lethal. His heart could stop any second. The room went dead silent. Nurse Green covered her mouth. Edward stared, uncomprehending, but the horror on Bennett's face told him enough. Dr. Bennett turned, his voice trembling between revelation and guilt. For 6 months we've been wrong. We thought it was neurological, but it's muscular. We've been flooding his body with electrolyte solutions, and we were making him worse. Edward's voice cracked. Explain. Bennett drew in a deep breath, then spoke the words that would change everything. Hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, a rare ion channel disorder. When he exerts himself, his muscle cells fail to regulate potassium. It floods his blood, paralyzes his muscles and threatens his heart. The words hung in the air like thunder, the proudest minds in the room, silent now before a truth seen first by a child. Edward bowed his head. Tears slipped down his face, soundless. He held Oliver's limp hand, then lifted his eyes to Maya. "You saved him," he said softly, his voice breaking but sure. "Not with medicine, with your eyes." Maya couldn't speak. The tears on her cheeks glistened in the rising dawn. For the first time, the world had finally seen what she had been seeing all along. When Dr. Bennett spoke the name of the disease, no one breathed. Only the monitors ticked on, and the sound of the sea whispered like a witness to the impossible. Oliver lay still, fragile as a thread of smoke. Yet the truth, long hidden, had finally been seen. Edward gripped his son's small hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "Save him." It was no longer the command of a billionaire. It was the plea of a father. Dr. Bennett nodded quickly, his hands trembling. "Glucose infusion, now." They moved with desperate precision. Needles, tubes, clear liquid, all glimmered under the morning light, as if the whole room were holding its breath. Maya stood against the wall, hands clasped tight, heart racing. All she could do was watch and silently pray. The first drop of glucose fell, merging into the blue vein beneath Oliver's pale skin. Time slowed. The numbers on the monitor flickered. 88, 92, 97. His breathing deepened, his color returned. "He's stabilizing," Bennett whispered, voice breaking. "He's coming back." Edward stepped back, trembling. Tears streamed down his face. 6 months of fear and helplessness dissolved into this fragile miracle. Oliver's eyes opened. A faint light stirred in them, and then, slowly, a smile. Weak but real. The room fell silent, awed by its beauty. Maya covered her mouth, tears spilling. Clara wept softly by the door. "You did it, son," Edward murmured. "You're safe now." Dr. Bennett removed his glasses, eyes red. He turned to Maya and bowed slightly. "I was wrong, not just in medicine, but in how I see the world. 6 months of machines and charts, and you saw it all with your eyes and your heart." Maya shook her head gently. "I only did what my great-grandmother taught, to watch and to believe what I see." "And that," he said softly, "saved a life." 3 days later, when Oliver had fully awakened, Dr. Bennett left the mansion. But before he went, he sent back a white envelope. Inside was a manuscript titled, "A Case of Hyperkalemic Periodic Paralysis, Observed Through the Eyes of a Child." At the bottom, in careful ink, "Dedicated to Maya Ruiz, who taught us how to see again." Not everyone was granted redemption. Edward called Nurse Green into his study, his tone calm but absolute. "You had skill but no humility. Pride made you deaf and nearly killed my son. You're dismissed." She bowed her head and left, her footsteps fading down the hall like the end of a long, bitter echo. Days later, Edward summoned Clara and Maya to the library. Standing by the window, he said, "You won't return to the staff quarters. The East Wing is empty. From now on, it's your home." Clara gasped. "Sir, we can't possibly—" "It's not repayment," he interrupted gently. "This house has been too cold. It needs people who remember how to breathe warmth into it." Time passed. The Langford mansion transformed. Laughter echoed through its once sterile halls. In the kitchen, Clara baked bread, filling the air with butter and cinnamon. Oliver walked again. Maya laughed beside him. And often on the balcony, Edward stood watching, the morning sun soft on his face, and smiled for the first time in months. The mansion, once frozen, was alive again. And it all began with the clear eyes of a little girl who believed that sometimes salvation doesn't come from knowledge, but from the courage to see and to believe. Time passed. Spring came, and the Langford mansion was fully alive again. Laughter filled the glass halls. Sunlight spilled across the floors. But even as warmth returned, something still stirred quietly in Edward's mind. The mystery of the woman in the worn leather notebook, the one whose eyes Maya had inherited. One afternoon, he found Clara in the kitchen, kneading dough. "I want to know more about her," he said. "About Alma Ruiz." Clara looked up in surprise. "She was an army nurse. Korean War. She saved people, hundreds of them. But after the war, her records vanished. It was like she was erased." Edward didn't stop there. He hired researchers, combed through veteran archives, military hospitals, and forgotten boxes of paper. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, a call came from Washington. They'd found her name, Alma Ruiz, field nurse, decorated for bravery, credited with saving over 100 lives. A line in faded ink read, "Silver Star recommendation, lost in transfer." Edward held the document for a long time. Something inside him stirred, admiration, sorrow, and awe. She had seen what others missed, and the world had simply forgotten her. Then came another lead. A name, John Pierce, 98, living in Virginia. A soldier she had once saved. Edward arranged the trip immediately. That evening, Maya and Clara joined him on the jet. Maya held Alma's journal close to her chest. "We're going to meet someone who knew her?" she whispered. Edward smiled softly. "Not just knew her, Maya. He owes her his life." The small Virginia house smelled of pine and dust. An old man sat by the window, his eyes still sharp despite his frailty. When he saw Maya, his lips trembled into a smile. "You're her family, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," Maya said. "I'm her great-granddaughter." John Pierce nodded slowly. "She saved me," he said. "They were going to take my leg. Said it was gangrene, but Alma stopped them. She said, 'It's not rot, it's metal. Smell it.' And she was right. It wasn't death, it was hot copper. Shrapnel cooking inside me. She pulled it out piece by piece. 3 days, no sleep." His voice trembled like wind, but his eyes burned bright with memory. "Without her, I'd have died in 1951. He reached for a small wooden box on the table. Inside, on worn velvet, lay a purple heart. He pushed it toward Maya. "They gave this to me, but it should have been hers." Clara covered her mouth. Edward bowed his head. Maya took the medal with both hands, her fingers trembling. The afternoon light hit its scratched surface, and for a moment it glowed. "She didn't just leave me her journal," Maya whispered. "She left me her courage." John smiled through his tears. "Then courage runs in your blood, child. Some legacies don't fade. They live through the ones who still dare to see." And in that quiet room, bathed in golden light, 3 generations met across time, the past, the present, and the future, bound by one simple truth: to see, to believe, and to have the heart to act. 2 weeks later, the Langford garden bloomed as if it had never known darkness. Oliver stood on the grass, his small shadow stretched long in the afternoon sun. He threw the ball toward Maya. This time it flew far and steady. "You're getting better," Maya laughed, her glove snapping as the ball landed with a soft pop. "Because of you," Oliver said, his cheeks flushed with wind and life. From the porch, Clara watched them, a notebook in hand. She was now the estate manager, the quiet heart, keeping the once-cold mansion alive and human again. Maya reached into her pocket. The Purple Heart medal lay there, warm against her palm, pulsing like a heartbeat. She looked up to see Edward standing on the second-floor balcony, arms folded, nodding. Not as a master, but as a man who had just watched his daughter grow. Sunlight streamed through the leaves, painting her face with the glow of a new beginning. "I used to think being invisible was safe," Maya said softly. "But sometimes, to save a life, you have to let yourself be seen." Oliver grinned and threw the ball back, its arc slicing through the golden light. She caught it, held it tight, and in that small, certain moment, she knew. She was no longer just the watcher. She was the healer.